Charlie Stevens here with another guitar lesson for you. Today we're going to learn how to read music as it applies to the guitar. So in a previous lesson we had talked about how to read music and the basics of how all that works. But we really need to know how that works on the guitar specifically because it works a little bit differently than how some other instruments such as the piano work. So on the piano we only have one of each pitch. Now we might have a C over here, we might have another C over here, but it will sound lower in pitch. We might have another C over here, but it will sound higher in pitch. But for instance, middle C, that is the only place we have that exact same frequency, that same C. Now on the guitar that's not true. Because I have different strings, I have that pitch pop up a few different times. So if you walked over to your piano and played middle C, that would sound like this. And I have that on my second string, my third string, my fourth string, my fifth string, even way up here on the sixth string. Right? I don't really play it there often because it's much easier to play it here, right? But you can see that it exists here, middle C. Okay? So that's one thing that we need to understand about the guitar to learn it, is that there's going to be a lot of duplicate notes all over the place, which is kind of hard to read sometimes because then it's not as clear as a piano. You see that note on piano, you play the note, you're done, right? On guitar, you need to go, well, what's the note before that? What's the note after that? Are there any other notes happening at the same time? That's going to influence your decision of which string to choose that exact pitch on, okay? So a little bit more of a challenge, but also it's really cool because that gives us the option. All of a sudden now we can do cooler stuff that the piano can't do because we can make decisions about that. We can even have our personal preferences. Oh, I like to play this C here. Oh, I like to play it here. Maybe you like to play yours here. Those could all be valid depending on our musical context. So very cool that we have this. It's the unison note is also what allows us to do tricks like that. We talked about this in our tuning video, how we can find tuning notes that are the same pitch and play them. So being aware of all these different options is a little bit daunting at first, but it's actually super cool. We can use these to do things that aren't possible on a lot of other instruments, and it's really awesome. So we were talking about this middle C here, and sonically speaking, that is middle C. If you walk over to a piano and you play that, it's middle C. Now let's talk about middle C for a minute. Traditionally, that's in the middle of the bass clef and the treble clef. We'd have our two different clefs and we'd have middle C right in between them, okay? That is not where we read that one for guitar. For guitar, if I see that one in the middle, even though on a piano it would sound like this, when I play it on guitar, it's actually going to sound like this. Why? Well, the guitar has a much deeper register into the bass clef. So if we really use the guitar as written, we would have to use the treble clef and the bass clef. And we'd have to go all the way down this low E string, my very lowest note on a standardly tuned guitar. Okay, if I really wanted to play that on the piano and match that up and then see where it would be written in music, it would actually be underneath the bass clef in our first, what we call a ledger line, actually completely underneath the entire bass clef. So it'd make it very difficult to read guitar because we'd need two clefs, and really the only instrument that deals with that is piano because they have one hand to do one clef, one hand to do another clef, and they can have kind of separate, separate musical lines going on and use their different hands for that. For guitar, it works a little bit differently. I only have this hand to do my musical line, and this helps articulate what this hand is doing, so they're working together. So reading two different clefs just is too confusing and doesn't work. So what they do is they transpose the treble clef. So we end up only having to read the treble clef, but everything we read actually sounds lower than it appears. Okay, so if I see the C, so let's pretend we're looking at our treble clef and we have F-A-C-E in the spaces. F-A-C-E. That C on the third line there, that I'm going to play here on my guitar. Even though if I were playing it on piano, that same note would be written on middle C. Okay, so everything is going to sound a little different, and this makes it possible to be able to play the guitar all in the treble clef. Sometimes they'll write a little 8 next to the treble clef, and that means octave displaced by 8, which means we are lowered down by an octave. So that's something important to remember, but if I'm confusing you right now, you don't really need to worry about it. I'm going to show you where these notes are, and if you only play guitar, it doesn't really matter that the piano works a little bit differently. But I just wanted to take a moment to explain this to you, because I went to college with a really great guitar player, and nobody had ever pointed this out to him, and he just happened to never notice it, and it's one of those things that, just doesn't really get talked about often. So I just wanted to kind of make you aware of how that works, that we're actually a transposing instrument, so everything you see on the page sounds an octave lower than it appears. This is true for the bass guitar too, by the way, or the upright bass. That's an octave down as well. So if you looked at the piano, where a piano plays this note E, for instance, I mentioned that was underneath the bass clef. When a bass plays a low E, it's actually an octave lower than that. So you'd need a whole ton of ledger lines under there to represent that note. So instead they just say, well, the whole thing is an octave down. So when we write that E under there, that's our lowest string E. Okay? So again, this stuff sounds a little bit more confusing than it needs to be. So if you're at an earlier stage and you're playing and all this stuff is kind of going over your head, don't worry about it. We're going to show you exactly how all this stuff works. So meet me over in the next video, and we're going to talk about how to find the notes on our first string, and we'll take it from there. Okay, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next lesson.